Today I have on Tso and Raymond Sun, two lawyers who have built a community of AI native lawyers called Legal Quants. Check out the previous episode for the full origin story. This episode is a check-in to see what they're up to, and we end up mostly talking about LQ Brain. LQ Brain is their adaptation of a digital brain to the collective knowledge base of the Legal Quants community. My chat with Jamie and Ray is a great introduction to the concept of a second brain and its potential role in legal. It offers a glimpse of what's next in AI and legal as we move from brute force methods of knowledge retrieval to something more akin to augmented cognition. Instead of querying raw source material, users search already distilled and already synthesized insights, an approach that promises improved extraction of the information users need from the mountains of data that they maintain. Talking to Ray and Jamie is like seeing around the corner of legal tech, so it was a real pleasure to have them on and glimpse a bit into the future. I hope you enjoy the episode. Jamie and Ray, welcome to Version Up.
Hello. Hey, Kai. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, Jamie, happy to have you back. Ray, welcome. Your first time on Version Up. Really excited to get an update on Legal Quants and what you guys have been up to.
So Legal Quants is a network of the world's best AI native lawyers who design and deploy the AI systems in their day-to-day practice. So for the past few months, we have had the great privilege to attract a pool of these we think that are the best technical lawyers in the world to join this community. We see that the activities are very intense. So we have everyone in a WhatsApp group. We have around 7,000 to 1,000 messages per week, and like there are people saying that we need a way to structure the knowledge better. So we started off with weekly digest and slowly moved towards second brain. And at this point, we knew that, there is a lot of knowledge that we can build around this community. And we see also that this new category of talent deserves more career options and deserves more visibility. So our mission here is to elevate this category of talent, to create new markets for them, and to build that whole ecosystem around. So that's what we're doing.
How do you become a member?
Yeah, so they have to fill out an application form, which consists of around 25 questions. They go through a one-on-one technical interview with either one of us, and to get to become Legal Quants. So right now we have around 500 applicants on the wait list. We have around 110 in the community, so we have around a 20% acceptance rate, and we believe that the acceptance rate will go probably lower in the future because of the interest in the group. I think that what we are doing here is not to gatekeep, it's really to define what the standard is, and we think that we are getting closer because we've seen so many lawyers actually using AI in a different way. Some use it more like a ChatGPT. They're still in the phase of tinkering with prompts, designing copilot agents. We also see on the other spectrum, lawyers who just are obsessed. They build and leverage AI nights and weekends. Feel that they feel that a kind of impulse to stay at the frontier. So they usually come up with, they appear in a certain form, and we're identifying that form quicker and quicker because we've seen so many. So right now we're defining what that looks like. So that will inform our roadmap down the road.
So legalquants.com, you've got community, you've got articles, the tools that you're building. And then I saw that you have something called LQ Brain. That's sort of a project that you're working on. Can you tell me more about that?
So the reason why we have this is because as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of activities in our group chat. So we have around 700 to 1,000 messages per week. In fact, this week we're reaching 2,000. So it's a record high. So it becomes extremely hard for members to catch what's new, what has been discussed, and members wouldn't want to ask questions that other people have asked before. So, for example, has anyone used this tool before? What's the best way to do X, Y, Z? So we first had this weekly digest, where it's members only, where we summarize everyone's chats and then create a summary of what has been discussed and the links to it. And we distribute it internally. People love it because they can see everything in one go. And then we slowly put those on our Substack to paid subscribers. And the paid subscribers also love it. So, but then because we want to also see how different concepts connect with each other to make this knowledge graph more timeless, because weekly digest has a particular time decay. It's almost like reading a newspaper. So you only read it and then you toss it. So we want something that's more perpetual, self-updating, and also more interconnected in terms of concepts. And I saw a lot of people on Instagram building their second brain using Obsidian and Cloud Code. I sent a bunch of them to Ray, and we thought, well, maybe we should do something. And that was at that point we were actually building, even before Andre Kaparfi came up with his method of the LM wiki. We actually have that and certainly within the group, so that people have been looking at it and pretty impressed by it. So and we kind of refined the technique after Andre Kaparfi released his version of the LM wiki. I was pretty simple. So with around 12,000 messages when we first built the first iteration of Brain, we ran agent teams across all chats, synthesized the top MOC, basically member of contents, on top that we discuss. We found that we already we have been discussing around these 8 topics: the dog problem, the identity of the legal quant, also, whether this vendor collapse thesis, and also, the document processing layer OCR problem, and so on. So we kind of created these main themes, and then Cloud Code automatically also drafts these atomic nodes with backlinks that link to other nodes. And we see that, well, I initially created that as an Obsidian graph, but then we needed a way to share among members. So we decided to use quants. So basically a method to actually visualize this brain. So that's why we deploy it on our website. So this is a way that people can actually access it. So that's the background to brain. But Ray can supplement, the bigger reason why we even have this, and what does it serve? What's the bigger purpose here?
Yeah, I mean, as the name suggests, it's meant to be a second brain, and running the network, it is a lot of work. It's also particularly a global network, different time zones, and people sort of new joiners come in, they don't necessarily have the same context that others have, and it's when the group was still small, it's easy for us to sort of catch up, have the coffee chats one-on-one. Here's what people are talking about. But as the group expands, it's really hard to do that. And so there's an element of I think that's the legal quant mindset. Systemize and go. Always keep systemizing what you've reached, what you've built, what you've talked about. And so LQ brain is just sort of one of the examples of that systemizing mindset where we make context. I think ultimately, like if I had to put this in one sentence, is making context queryable, right? Making a memory, digital memory, all those words that we keep hearing about, AI native, all these words really come down to is making things queryable. You can ask it and get your response. And with LQ brain, it's just the brain. Like you can, give it hands, give it feet, give it eyes. So there'll be new add-ons to that to really make legal quants even more like systemized, and will just make the community a lot more smooth to run, and people can actually feel like no matter when they join, they feel like they've got everything.
So if you're a new member that joined, how do you query the brain? How do you engage with the actual knowledge base that's there?
So we have a website, it's hosted on the website. So we will send a link to the new joiner along with the password. And it's up to them, because we have an agent that will help you query the brain. It starts with index and then read your question to see which notes the agent should read to answer your question. So for example, you're asking a question about, okay, which OCR library is the best? Then on our map of content with a themes, the agent will immediately read the document processing theme and then go there. And then it's almost like a file system. It opens a file within this folder, the files within this folder, and see that like 20 different insights, debates, and notes around document processing, and then read the relevant ones about OCR, and then slowly to go deeper and deeper. So it's almost like neural networks, not in the actual training phase. This is, and we're not proposing that we're machine learning, but I see that it's something that's similar in a sense that these funnels are interconnected that way. So and kind of dig deeper and deeper, understand the question, more context, and then know how to actually fit the answer to the question. So it's up to them. We have we subscribe to Minimax, which is a very generous token, really generous token plan. So there's currently no rate limit to it.
It seems like it would have a broader application, right? You can imagine this being deployed within a larger enterprise. Is this sort of a testing ground for you for something that could be turned into a product, or is this more of just a feature you want to have built into the LegalQuants website and you're happy to leave it at that?
For now, we just think that this is something that our community members love, and we'll just continue doing that, because we just have a lot of things that we're doing community, and this is just one of them. We committing to a certain product for us, I think it's depends on whether it actually has broader use case, like you said. Right now we see that this has become a really common technique that everyone is using. So I don't see that as something that requires a certain company to package this into a product that someone can sell. So anyone, there are members in our community that have their own versions, right? I think Oliver created something around GDPR regulations or some other regulations, basically a second brain of this regulation, and see how different rules and regulations interact with each other. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's worth doing that. I can, however, see that larger tech companies would be more interested in doing this. I think Google has something similar, which enterprises would plug and play, I believe. And I forgot the name, but then I think that I think YC's latest request for startups as well. I think yes, one request is to start a company that will create second brain for enterprises. There are definitely companies that will go down this path and create something that will be enterprise ready. Yeah,
I'm stuck in my sort of legal business brain always. So let me give you a couple of examples that come to mind. One is a law firm. You have a lot of different partners that are trying to generate business across the enterprise, and they're not always talking to each other. You might have one partner making a pitch, not realizing that another partner already maybe did some work for the client 4 years ago. Now, there's of course databases and there's products that are out there that claim to help law firms make those connections across their enterprise. But I could imagine like a second brain being one way to tap into that collective knowledge base of the law firm, right? Is that the kind of thing that a second brain would be able to help with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the history of legal tech, you can see distinctive phases of thinking. So I think pre-generative AI, majority of people are thinking about document automation, the deterministic templates, having some form that can auto-fill out your documents. Then generative AI came in, everyone started thinking about, contract red lines, contract playbooks. Like these tend to be like the top 2 or 3 use cases. Now with these methods and agentic AI coming through, naturally, I mean, I'd say 8 out of 10 lawyers who are in this space are always thinking about second brain, aggregating data, making value from data.
Yeah.
I think we expect to hear this sort of discussion over the next course or so. So I feel like, I mean, how do you achieve that second brain? Like, there's going to be like so many techniques. A lot of big platform companies will start to say, we're going to provide a harness for you build to build. We're going to hear a lot of that. I think it's just part of just a new paradigm where I think, we'll always keep hearing data's a new oil. And we sort of rationally get that. But I think we're really going to start to see that in our face every day over the next year or so. And it's just gonna re-level the playing field, right? I think maybe in this year, like whoever have the digital brain, second brain, will have that moat, will have that advantage. But as we saw with agentic coding, making it super easy to build apps, I think that will become table stakes very soon. And then there'll be a whole new, the playing field will be okay. Now that you have a second brain, what's next, man? What's your new value add? What's your moat? So I think that's going to be the trajectory.
That's really helpful context, actually. And it answers a question I've had in the back of my mind, which is where are we headed? As a user, a lot of legal tech products to me seem to be experiencing a flattening of features, and it's harder and harder to differentiate between different products out there. And there are always very niche solutions that people might be offering. But in terms of general purpose solutions, it's a little unclear to me where we go from here and how we move up the value chain of what a lawyer does. And the second brain, the digital brain that you're describing, does feel like a natural progression from where we are now. That's interesting.
For sure. We see that this is more. I think the adoption would start from just smaller teams. For example, this practice group wants something that the team members can query. So they build a second brain that around the certain 20 to 30 matters, and the common templates, their boilerplate, and so on. Matter status, which client has which files, that kind of work. But then slowly, I think that they'll as this technique becomes more mature, then different second brain and brains in different practice groups could consolidate and merge into a bigger brain. As in there is a new infrastructure to support that. Is like Andre Karpathy said, the second brain works best when we have around 100 to 130 atomic nodes. Once it gets to 1 million, it's harder and harder to more and more reliable. I think the appeal of having a knowledge graph that way is that it's sometimes it's than using RAG, for example, and it also has more personality. So in our own internal dog fooding, when I have repeatedly experienced that, using this second brain, LQ brain, would give us a lot more character and personality and a deeper philosophical understanding of what we achieve. So if we have certain questions about roadmaps, which direction we want to go, I want to kind of think from the community perspective, what would be best, and how the community thinks. We wouldn't necessarily ask everyone in the community. We just ask out to brain to see, how an average member or a superior member, because there's all knowledge of all members, would think. So it gives us way more insights into, how we can structure a roadmap better than if we can do this alone. It is better than just a RAG process, because our interest, our roadmap is not dependent one or two members' individual message, right? So I think the reason why the knowledge graph, and this is the point where we should highlight a really important distinction as to how this is different from just pulling all the chats and then putting it into the context window and the cache. It's because we have summarized and distilled the insights first and organized them in a really good way. So like I said, when we first built this, we use agent teams. We dispatch 20 to 30 agents to look for common topics and insights. It has already generated insights based on these chats. And when you're querying this knowledge graph, you're querying the insights, the debates, and not the raw chat. So it gives you much more nuances to your answer, and much more personality. So you can even say it's like a reasoning harness way, because it already has different people's different positions. So other members have tested it as well, and this kind of same feeling that it felt like asking a fellow legal quant about a certain problem, right? As it has kind of behind it.
And I'm gonna do a slight digression and talk about what's the cultural impact when the norm is around this second brain, because as I said, the whole point is to record context. And so there's one thing, you can have text chats that they're easily exportable, you can organize them. But then how do you capture offline sort of interactions, right? Like calls, meetings, conferences, kitchen coffee chats. And this is where, the whole idea, and I think this has been an ongoing, not moral question or ethical question, but to what extent should we record everything? I think that's kind of the thing that we're gonna probably think about in the future, which is, should every call be recorded? Should every call be transcribed? And once that question then opens up questions around privacy, consents, ethics. We have to relook at how these things have to adapt to this new era. And then there might become a question that rises to every boardroom, which is what's your risk position? What's your comfort level? What's your culture around recording? And, maybe the more dirty word is surveillance, right? What's your culture around that? How much do you want to capture that context? And it's a very clear risk and reward ratio. The more context you're willing to capture and record, the bigger your moat, the smarter and more capable your brain is. At the cost of potential culture, do people necessarily want to be open and free with each other? How's that going to affect your workplace? I think that's something that not many have explored yet. I think we're only scratching the surface. I think the typical conversation around this tends to be around privilege, admission of evidence, all that. But I think that's only the iceberg, tip of the iceberg. There's so much deeper stuff below that, which is why I think this is a really big paradigm shift. And yeah, as Jamie said, I think right now people still tend to think, oh, just export everything, chuck all your documents into a Claude chat and ask it, and it'll give you the answer. Well, there's actually a lot more engineering behind it. This is where context engineering comes in. But once that becomes sort of known, the next question is, okay, where do you get the context? Moving forward, how do you ensure consistent high quality context that's captured every day? Maybe that might be a 27, 28 conversation, but yeah.
The way you're describing how you set up the second brain and how you maintain it, you have the agents go and look at all the raw data, like you said, the meeting notes, the transcripts. But once the agentic AI has pulled out the insights and sort of saved the insights, can't you then just delete the original raw data? Can't you get rid of that? And if that's the case, if you're just keeping the insights, but you're not keeping all the raw data, is that actually maybe more secure, less intrusive from a privacy perspective?
Depends on what you're trying to query. Because a lot of times you love to have, for example, like case law and all that. I mean, you love to have order, the precedents there. And even if you're able to extract one or two sentence summaries, I mean, you still need to be able to reference back to the original source material to sort of validate. And I mean, everyone's talking about hallucination and Gaussian and all that. So like, you gotta have that sort of verification and type probability provenance for that. So in that context, you probably need to have all the original data and anything, and that's an analogy for basically anything that requires provenance. And I think in most legal contexts, like that almost like 9 out of 10 times you need to have the original somewhere. I think that's kind of like how legal systems tend to be built on. I think the 10% where you probably don't need that raw stuff is probably, I don't know, social chats or things that don't necessarily rise to the evidence, things that don't require that don't have a huge evidentiary significance. That's probably where you can live off of just in like summarized chats, but I think that's only like a rare subset of cases. And so that kind of goes back to Jamie's point around, how we're gonna think about rates and context windows, and does the infrastructure, can it accommodate for exponential growing data? It's a huge infrastructure. It's actually really deep in the stack that a lot of people are trying to solve.
So when I think about new solutions, I always try to compare them to a baseline of what exists already. You've talked about sort of how RAG works and the difference in how the retrieval works. But what about the foundation models? They have emerging features around memory, right? They've had artifacts for a while. How do I think about all those features and compare them to the second brain?
Yeah, it's fundamentally a question around what is considered built-in memory versus external knowledge base. That's the balance, right? To really simplify it, the stronger the memory the model has, the less pressure you need to have a really big knowledge base, and sort of vice versa. Models with really high memory are pretty expensive. They're pretty expensive to run. Just, I mean, what maybe they'll get cheaper over time, but I think for now in the market, not that many models have really good memory apart from the Chinese models. I think Chinese models tend to really hone in on memory techniques given the restraints around chips and all of that. And so maybe we'll see a trend where models get good at memory. But memory can only sort of go so far in terms of I mean, it's kind of like the question of like how much sort of context do you necessarily need to have built in to the model? What can be actually be deferred to a knowledge base? Like for example, us humans, right? I mean, the information that we retain in our head tends to be only be key piece of information. We don't necessarily have to memorize or ate for breakfast on the 7th of October 2019. Like that sort of detail probably don't need to be committed to your memory. You can probably just have it somewhere in a diary. So like think of that in the computer analogy, like the really minute small details probably don't need to be in a memory, can just be in some data set. And that's where that balance tends to lie. And so I guess long story short is as memory functions improve, I think that that does have that the how we sort of try to, how much resources and time do we need to invest in knowledge data sets. But that doesn't mean that knowledge data sets are irrelevant. They're still gonna be relevant. It's just that the ratio can be tweaked a bit.
I would just add that there is this concept called short-term, medium-term, and long-term memory. So, for example, that's the default structure for OpenCore as well. With for the memory.md file will be the long-term memory. Your memory logs as well every day, but then you also have contingent memory for each session. So we also see that there is something called G-brain, right? From Gary Tan. G-brain is becoming like the standard for creating your own second brain. So I think these kind of memory architecture, as it gets more and more mature, then we see that the the advantage of maintaining such a brain is actually it's better in understanding interconnect context.
Does this also help with token usage? Is this like a less token depletive way of retrieving information? In a world where we have a token shortage, in a sense, and a compute shortage, does using a second brain as an alternative to some of what we've talked about,
Yeah.
does that address in any way that issue?
So I would say that by creating that second brain and backlinks and automate nodes to start with, you burn a lot of tokens upfront. Instead of trying to claim data set every single time. So really, so imagine if you have a lot of files, a lot of raw text, and you ask Claude Code a question and have Claude Code look through all the text and files, it's going to be extremely token inefficient. But if you run a lot of tokens to that second brain to start with, then each question would be more token efficient because you are only querying the files and you already created those neurological pathways, which the LM can travel through using tools. So, like you said, that is indeed a more token efficient way.
Interesting. Very interesting. Very cool, guys. I feel like I should check in with you every 3 months because I will see into the future every time I talk to you. Most of us, non-savvy users, if we're lucky, we exist in the present. Many users probably exist in the past still in terms of what they're using. So very helpful to see a little bit into the future. Really appreciate you coming on to tell us about LQ Brain and how it fits into this sort of bigger picture trends around digital brains.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting us today.